A picture went viral recently of a little girl standing on a toilet. At first, the Michigan mom who snapped the photo of her 3-year-old daughter thought she was just being silly, but the true reason behind the child's actions was heartbreaking. She was practicing for a lockdown drill, something the toddler learned at her preschool. After seeing this, we decided to look into what schools are doing to keep kids safe and how they are going about it. Joining us now is school safety consultant Suzanne Sibole. She's with the Youth Risk Prevention Specialist. Suzanne, your company, Youth Risk Prevention Specialist, has spent the last 25 years developing safety practices in schools. How has that changed since you first started?
Well, there's a lot more emphasis on being prepared. One of the things I've really seen a lot of is response protocols, such as active shooter training. That's something we did not have 25 years ago at all. The other thing that's really growing is something that's been around for about 20 years, violence threat assessment, and that's putting together teams within school districts and training that team on assessing cases when they're concerned about someone's behavior or actions so they can intervene and prevent violence from happening. This has been around, as I said, about 20 years. It's the exact model used by Secret Service and the FBI, but we're using it for schools now.
So, for this violent threat assessment, is that due to gang violence or just violence in general, bullying, or?
When we see there are violence warning signs, I train staff about suicide warning signs and violence warning signs, and there is some overlap with those. And when we see these signs, we want to intervene because typically they indicate that someone is struggling. They might be struggling with an undiagnosed mental illness, they might be angry, they may have a grievance, they might have an ongoing or long term conflict with a group of people or an individual. So we want to identify those signs early on and talk with the person and figure out what kind of help they need so we can intervene and keep it from ever becoming a serious violent incident.
Following the 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, did you see a
Mhm.
boost in business?
I did not actually, and that's kind of surprising, but no, I think schools, the thing that I saw grow at that point was the active shooter training. People got very scared, decided it's time to really look at what are we going to do if someone gets in. And I think we're still really trying to get the word out that there's a lot we can do on the prevention end. And I just don't think people are very aware of that yet.
Yeah, are school shootings your main focus right now? I mean, since Sandy Hook, there's been more than 100 school shootings in the U.S.,
Mhm.
averaging almost one a week. That's quite a bit.
Right. School shootings are really very rare, and my work encompasses all of school safety, so I work with school districts to make sure they have a great crisis and safety plan. So they do drills and practice their response protocols. We look at locked entrances. Do they have a procedure for tracking people, having people check in and tracking who's in their buildings? A lot of everyday school safety kinds of things I focus on too. So even though I do a fair amount of the violence threat assessment training, I'm still doing an entire complete assessment of what's going on in their district and how they can improve their safety.
And what goes into planning crisis and lockdown drills and things like that?
Well, there are a lot of protocols and templates out there that people can use. It's easy to do that, and I think a lot of times schools are just so crunched for time and for dollars, and they just aren't able to invest a lot of time. So they might start with a template, but I always talk about personalizing it for your school because we have schools in different settings. They might be rural, they might be urban, they might have a train coming through that could have a chemical spill, whereas another school may not have that. So we want to take every protocol for every possible emergency and break it down and look at how it applies to our own individual schools and then personalize it.
Lots of
Usually it's a team working on it most of the time.
lots of things to consider there. What about school bus training? Anything happen on the school bus that you might want to look out for?
Well, I think school bus drivers will tell you and have always said that it's a tough job. They're trying to keep their eyes on the road and keep the kids safe, and kids can be very disruptive. There can be bullying issues going on that maybe they're not even aware of because kids can be very subtle in their bullying. So some districts do have bus driver training. I think everyone in the district needs to be trained in aspects of school safety, including food service, including substitute teachers, because sometimes they're not in the building when training takes place. So I think we need to pull everybody in, custodians, bus drivers, and really just teach people about behaviors to be aware of.
That's a really good point. What about you mentioned the school buses and planning the lockdown drills inside the buildings.
Mhm.
Are those things that you just come up with educators, or are there laws or policies in place and regulations in states?
There are regulations in states. Some states actually require a crisis and safety plan. I think most do at this point, and many require that it be reviewed every 3 years. I always recommend reviewing it annually. When we do drills, we're testing our protocols, and that enables us to find out whether we have gaps or whether we're not performing properly, or maybe something we wrote in a protocol isn't feasible or isn't actually playing out in reality. So we want to constantly review those. But there are states that require even to have each school submit their plan annually or once every few years, so the state can check them off on a rubric and make sure they're covering all different aspects of safety.
I want to talk again about that photo I showed earlier in the interview of the little toddler. I think she was 3 years old,
Yes.
standing on the toilet. How do you explain, what you're practicing to these little ones? How do you explain that to, say, a 3-year-old? Why they're doing that?
Well, I think there are ways we can do it without scaring them. I think we could start by talking about the things we do every single day to protect ourselves. We wear seatbelts. Younger kids are in car seats. We don't expect to have to stop the car suddenly, um, be forced to stop it, but we wear these just in case, just to protect ourselves. We wear bike helmets. We don't think we're going to fall off our bike, but we might. So we wear our helmets just in case. We look both ways before we cross the street, just in case a car is coming. So I think young kids understand that concept very well. We can call drills safety drills rather than something that might be potentially scary to a child, like intruder drill. I
Okay.
don't think we need to say that. We can talk about how we're practicing skills to stay in our classroom in case we need to clear the hallway. Give them examples like maybe a neighborhood dog got in the building and is running loose. We need to stay in our classroom until it's taken care of. Or maybe someone got hurt in the hallway. We need to stay in our classroom and not go out there so medical help can arrive and attend to the person. I think we can explain that drill is really another word for practice, and provide examples for kids of maybe athletes and musicians performing drills to improve their skills. So there are ways to frame it where it doesn't have to be frightening. And even very young children, I think, understand hide and seek. So we can talk about that concept that sometimes we have to hide. And we might have a very, very rare situation where we have to be very quiet for a period of time. So, a great recommendation is teach kids about being quiet, about imagining relaxation and imagery kind of exercises ahead of time. Have them close their eyes and imagine a happy place or a wonderful memory that makes them feel very calm. And then, if you do find yourself in a lockdown situation and kids need to be quiet, you can cue them and say, okay, everybody close their eyes and quietly go to that happy place. I think those are all very positive ways of doing it. But I do think kids can have fears. I think parents can have fears. So it's important for teachers after a drill to process with the kids so they can hear if there are anxieties or fears, and they can reassure the kids that all of these things are extremely rare. Kids understand fire drills. Most kids have done them, maybe not when they're really little, but even some families are doing fire drills. So we can talk again about fires are rare, very, very rare, and we do not expect them to happen in our schools or our homes, but we practice just in case.
So
So I
focus
think
on preventative measures versus, and just emphasize that it is not
exactly,
the norm. It's just a form of prevention.
exactly.
Suzanne, especially after the Orlando shooting, we're hearing a lot about gun control. Democratic
Hmm.
lawmakers staged a sit-in demanding gun control legislation. What are
Right.
your thoughts on having security or even teachers carry a firearm on school grounds?
Well, I think that, there's a case for both sides of that coin, and I don't think we're going to solve that one anytime soon. People, proponents of having armed teachers and security guards on school grounds will cite instances where people have been killed in a shooting attack by hiding in unsecured places, under tables, under desks, things like that. But the other side is there are many instances of people who have survived when they've locked down properly. So the key is to be able to act quickly, to truly lock down, to reinforce the lockdown by pushing furniture and various things up against the wall or the door, and really locking down. I think most safety experts would tell you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Lockdown is still a very good option. We need to keep that in mind. I think also there's the piece where people will say more survivors are likely if you have someone armed who can shoot back and defend the people under attack. So I think that's valid. However, when we think about teachers and even armed security guards that are actually not law enforcement trained, they're not likely to have the same kind of skills as trained law enforcement. Law enforcement officers work with their weapons all the time. They are retrained all the time. They have negotiation skills and response skills and lots of other things that lay people typically don't have. So I'm not sure it's the best idea to put teachers or security guards in charge of public safety. It's a huge responsibility. And we also know there's research out there that shows that the more guns that are present in any location, the more likely it is that there will be accidents. And there have been examples of where that's happened.
Yeah, lots of good points on both sides of the coin, a debate that surely we won't be hearing the end of. Suzanne Sibole, thanks so much for joining us this evening.
You're very welcome. Thank you.